An 8,000-year-old skeleton, but DNA shows the impossible. There is a skeleton buried beneath layers of earth, dated to a time when human civilization was still fragile, scattered, and uncertain. 8,000 years ago, people were just beginning to farm, to settle, to build the first quiet foundations of what we now call history. And yet, when scientists extracted DNA from this skeleton, something appeared that should not exist. Not then. Not there. Not in that body. The data didn't just challenge history, it ignored it. Because according to everything we thought we knew, this person carried genetic markers that belonged to a population that wouldn't exist for thousands of years. It's the kind of contradiction that doesn't just raise questions, it forces you to rethink the timeline itself. At first, the discovery seemed like any other archaeological find. The skeleton was uncovered in a region already known for early human settlement. The bones were carefully preserved, positioned in a way that suggested intentional burial. Tools were found nearby, simple, consistent with what we expect from early Neolithic communities. Nothing about the site seemed unusual. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the age, roughly 8,000 years old. Everything aligned perfectly with the established narrative of early human life. A small community, living close to the land, adapting slowly as the world changed around them. But then came the genetic analysis. When researchers sequenced the DNA, they expected to find markers common to early agricultural populations in that region, ancestry linked to hunter-gatherers transitioning into settled life. Instead, they found something else entirely. A genetic signature that didn't belong. It matched, almost precisely, with populations that would not appear in the historical record until much later, in entirely different geographic regions. It was as if this individual had traveled through time or belonged to a lineage that had no right to exist yet. At first, the simplest explanation was error. Contamination, perhaps. DNA samples can be delicate, easily compromised. Laboratories repeated the tests, using different methods, different equipment, even different teams. The results remained the same. The anomaly was real. The data was clean. And the implications were unsettling. So researchers turned to the surface explanation, the idea that perhaps our understanding of ancient migration was incomplete. After all, history is full of gaps. Maybe this genetic lineage existed earlier than we thought. Maybe small, undocumented groups moved across vast distances, leaving little trace behind except in rare cases like this. It was a reasonable theory. Human movement has always been more complex than simple maps suggest. But there was a problem. This genetic marker wasn't just rare, it was specific. It wasn't something you'd expect to find scattered in small, isolated groups. It belonged to a well-defined population with a distinct evolutionary history. And according to everything we know about that population, they hadn't even emerged yet. Their genetic profile was the result of later mixing events, environmental pressures, and adaptations that simply hadn't happened 8,000 years ago. Which meant the surface explanation didn't hold. And that's where the deeper mystery began. If this individual wasn't a mistake, and the DNA wasn't contaminated, then something else had to explain it. Something that required stepping outside the comfortable boundaries of established history. Researchers began to look not just at where this person lived, but who they might have been connected to genetically, culturally, and temporally. One possibility was that our timeline itself is incomplete. That human populations may have diverged, mixed, and reformed in ways we don't yet fully understand. Maybe there were advanced genetic lineages that rose and disappeared long before recorded history, leaving only fragments behind. This skeleton could be one of those fragments, a survivor of a lost population whose story was erased over time. Another theory suggested long-distance migration, far earlier than previously believed. Not slow, generational movement, but rapid, unexpected travel across continents. If groups of people move thousands of kilometers in relatively short periods, they could carry genetic signatures into regions where they wouldn't normally appear. But this idea comes with its own challenges. There is little archaeological evidence to support such early, widespread movement on that scale. No clear trail of settlements. No gradual spread. Just a sudden, isolated appearance. A third theory, more controversial, questioned the assumptions behind genetic timelines themselves. What if the way we interpret DNA is flawed? What if certain genetic markers can emerge independently under similar conditions, creating the illusion of connection where none exists? Convergent evolution is a known phenomenon in biology, but seeing it at this level, in human DNA, would require a mechanism we don't yet fully understand. Each theory offered a piece of the puzzle. None completed it. Then came a breakthrough. A team of researchers conducted a broader comparative study, analyzing not just this skeleton, but dozens of ancient DNA samples from different regions and time periods. They weren't looking for answers to this specific case, they were looking for patterns. And what they found was unexpected. In a handful of other samples, scattered across different locations and timeframes, there were faint traces of the same genetic signature. Not as strong, not as clear, but present. It was subtle, almost easy to miss. But it suggested something important. This wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was part of a larger, hidden pattern, one that had gone unnoticed because no one had been looking for it. The implication was profound. If these genetic markers existed earlier than we thought, and appeared in multiple places, then our understanding of human ancestry might be missing an entire layer. A hidden network of populations, interacting and evolving in ways that left almost no trace except in rare genetic echoes. But the twist didn't end there. When scientists examined the specific genes involved, they noticed something else. These weren't just random markers. Some of them were linked to traits that offered advantages, adaptations to climate, resistance to certain diseases, metabolic efficiency. In other words, this wasn't just a different lineage. It was a lineage that carried traits that would become important much later in human history. Which raises a deeper question. How could those traits exist before the conditions that required them? This is where the mystery shifts from historical to almost philosophical. Because it suggests that evolution may not always be a simple, linear response to environment. It may be more complex, more dynamic, capable of producing variations that only become significant much later. Like a kind of genetic foresight, built not by intention, but by the unpredictable nature of mutation and survival. Imagine holding a piece of the future in your DNA, thousands of years before it becomes relevant. Living a life that seems ordinary, unaware that your genetic makeup doesn't belong to your time. I tried to picture this person not as a data point, but as a human being. They walked, ate, spoke, maybe had a family. To everyone around them, they were just another member of the community. And yet, within their cells, there was something different. Something that connected them to a future that hadn't happened yet. They didn't know it. They couldn't know it. But we do. And that's what makes this discovery so powerful. It's not just about correcting timelines or refining scientific models. It's about recognizing how incomplete our understanding still is. How much of human history exists not in written records or artifacts, but hidden in the code of our DNA? This skeleton doesn't just challenge what we know. It challenges how we know it. Because if a single individual can carry a genetic signature that defies time, then what else might be hidden in the millions of other samples we've yet to fully understand? How many other impossible patterns are waiting to be discovered, not because they are rare, but because we haven't asked the right questions? In the end, this isn't just a story about the past. It's a reminder that history is not fixed. It's something we reconstruct, piece by piece, from incomplete evidence. And sometimes, those pieces don't fit the way we expect. When that happens, we have a choice. We can force them into the existing picture, or we can step back and accept that the picture itself might need to change. Because somewhere, buried in the past, there are still stories that don't make sense yet. And maybe they're not supposed to. Maybe they're there to remind us that the line between what we know and what we think we know is much thinner than we realize. The line between what we know and what we think we know is much thinner than we realize. And it is exactly at that line where this story refuses to end. Because once scientists accepted that this was not a mistake, not contamination, not a simple anomaly, they were forced into a far more uncomfortable position. They had to ask a question that science usually avoids unless absolutely necessary. What if the timeline itself is wrong? The next phase of research did not begin in the field, but inside data. Quiet labs, dim screens, long sequences of code. Scientists began reanalyzing genetic databases that had been built over decades. Thousands of ancient DNA samples, collected from different continents, different climates, different eras, were placed side by side. The goal was simple: find anything that even slightly resembled the genetic signature found in the 8,000-year-old skeleton. At first, nothing obvious appeared. Which is exactly what made the next discovery so unsettling. The pattern was not loud. It did not announce itself clearly. Instead, it existed in fragments, tiny percentages of DNA, almost dismissed as noise. But when these fragments were mapped carefully, something began to form. A faint genetic thread, appearing across time and geography, connecting individuals who should have had no connection at all. It was like seeing the outline of something invisible, only noticeable when you stopped looking directly at it. And this thread pointed to something unexpected. It suggested that the genetic signature found in the skeleton was not an early version of a future population. It was something else entirely. Something older. Something that may have existed alongside known human groups, but remained largely hidden from the archaeological record. This changed everything. Because now, the question was no longer how did this future DNA appear in the past? The question became, what if this DNA was never from the future at all? One group of researchers proposed a radical idea. They suggested that human genetic history may not be a straight line, but a layered structure. Instead of one continuous progression, there may have been overlapping populations, some dominant, some nearly invisible, interacting in ways that left only partial traces. According to this theory, the 8,000-year-old individual may have belonged to one of these hidden layers. A population that coexisted with early humans, contributed to their evolution, but never left a strong enough footprint to be clearly identified until now. But again, the theory had a weakness. If such a population existed, where were the rest of them? Why was the evidence so rare, so scattered, so incomplete? Another team approached the mystery from a different angle. Instead of focusing on populations, they focused on time itself. They examined mutation rates, the biological clock that scientists use to estimate when genetic changes occur. And what they found raised even more questions. Because mutation rates are not always constant. Under certain conditions, they can accelerate or slow down, creating distortions in the genetic timeline. In simple terms, DNA does not always tell time accurately. If mutation rates varied significantly in the past, then the entire framework used to date genetic lineages could be slightly off. Not completely wrong, but shifted, stretched, compressed in ways we don't fully understand. This could mean that what we interpret as future DNA might actually be much older than we think, or that certain traits appeared earlier, disappeared, and then reappeared later under similar conditions. But even this explanation didn't fully resolve the mystery. Because the genetic signature in the skeleton was not just slightly out of place, it was precisely aligned with a population that should not exist yet. The level of similarity was too exact to be explained by timing errors alone. And that's when the most unsettling idea began to take shape. Not widely accepted. Not fully proven. But impossible to ignore. Some researchers began to consider the possibility that human history includes episodes of contact and mixing that we have no clear record of. Not in the sense of advanced civilizations or lost technologies, but in terms of small, isolated groups encountering each other in ways that left almost no trace. Encounters that were rare, brief, and easily erased by time, but still enough to transfer genetic material. Imagine two populations meeting for a short period. They exchange more than just culture, they exchange DNA. Then they separate, move on, disappear, or evolve in different directions. Thousands of years later, one group becomes prominent, leaving clear historical records. The other fades into obscurity. But the genetic connection remains, hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. This would explain the precision of the DNA match. Not as a coincidence, not as an error, but as a memory encoded in the body, carried across generations, surviving even when everything else is lost. But there was one more twist. And this one changed the emotional weight of the entire story. When scientists looked closer at the skeleton itself, not just the DNA, but the bones, the structure, the signs of life, they noticed something subtle. This individual did not appear different from others of the same time. There were no obvious physical traits that set them apart. No signs that they belonged to a distinct or isolated group. They lived, physically, like everyone else around them. Which means whatever made them different was invisible. It existed at a level no one could see. Not their family. Not their community. Not even themselves. And that realization brings the mystery closer to something personal. Because it suggests that history is not just something that happens around us. It's something we carry within us. Quietly, silently, without knowing. Layers of identity, ancestry, and connection that extend far beyond what we can observe. I tried to imagine standing there, at the moment this person was buried. The people around them grieving, remembering, saying goodbye in whatever way their culture allowed. To them, this was not a mystery. It was a loss. A human moment, simple and real. And yet, beneath that moment, there was a story unfolding that would not be discovered for 8,000 years. A story written not in words, but in code. And now, we are the ones reading it. But we are still learning the language. Because every answer we find seems to open another question. Every explanation reveals another layer of uncertainty. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the value of discoveries like this is not in solving the mystery completely, but in expanding the boundaries of what we are willing to question. This skeleton does not give us a clear conclusion. It gives us something more important. Perspective. It reminds us that human history is not a finished story. It is a living, evolving puzzle. And sometimes, the most important pieces are the ones that don't seem to fit. So the next time we look at the past, we should remember this. What we see is only part of the picture. The rest is still hidden, waiting, encoded in places we are only beginning to explore. And maybe, somewhere out there, there are more discoveries like this one. More impossible stories, quietly buried, waiting for the moment when someone finally asks the right question. If you found this story interesting, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us. Because the deeper we go into history, the more it begins to look like something we never expected.